The second part of the framework is, and I'm sure it's not true in your organization, but most organizations internally have these communications problems. Most organizations' problems are really caused internally. There isn't some evil empire that's usually causing their problems. And one of the things that they do that exacerbates those problems is having a lot of acronyms and jargon. So I've seen some already on the screen where you start putting up acronyms or abbreviations or whatever, and I'm sure you know all of those. But there's a real risk in that when you start to communicate to broader audiences, because you then have this breakdown in communications at a time when we need to have really great communications. And I was thinking of an example in my career early on where when I worked in marketing training, but I reported in through a human resources group, and they'd have these monthly meetings talking about what's happening in the organization, who's moving where, whatever. And I'll never forget, in one meeting they said, and we're going to welcome Melanie back from STD. So, all right, we've already learned a lot about the audience. Okay, so you're never quite sure what you're welcoming Melanie back from, which could be, what could we be welcoming her back from? What? This is where everybody's mumbling into the table. What could we? It could be sexually transmitted disease. Okay, so you're not so sure how enthusiastically you're welcoming her back. Maybe it's with a mask or surgical gloves or something like that. But it was actually what? Short-term disability. So the problem is you don't do that. Don't start using acronyms and jargon. And one other example in my life, as I say, I'm the youngest of 7 boys. I was the only one that wasn't in the service, and although I have a tremendous amount of respect for the service, and my brother was a career military officer, he was a judge advocate, right? And so they had this TV show, JAG, and I always said, Dick, what does that look like? He said, no, those people are all better looking than the people I worked with. He said, the people I worked with didn't look like that. But we did a lot of work with the Navy, because the Navy's a big customer of Johnson & Johnson. So a captain of the Theodore Roosevelt invited me to come on to the Theodore Roosevelt aircraft carrier, 5,000 people, and do a little workshop with his management team, his wardroom, which is really just like any other organization. These are the people that report to the captain. And it was really about understanding different procedures they wanted to do. He had this idea where he wanted to get ideas from the crew, et cetera, and change really the mission of the carrier to be more proactive. Anyway, in this whole discussion, the whole day I was moderating it, and I said, Captain, I wasn't in the Navy. He said, that's why I want you to moderate this discussion, because you don't have a dog in this fight, whatever. So I kept interrupting the presentation because everything is acronyms and jargon. I mean, the group I was talking to was called ComNav Air Land. So this was the command of the Naval Air Force Atlantic Fleet, right? So I'm interrupting this talk. What does this mean? What does that mean? What does this mean? What does that mean? At the end of the presentation, this officer came up to me, probably about my age, and I thought, well, he's going to come up and he's going to take a swing at me. You hippie commie from Princeton, I'll fix your wagon or whatever. He said, I'm so glad you asked those questions. I've been in the Navy for 25 years, and I didn't know what half the stuff was that they were talking about. And he said, but I just didn't want to ask because I didn't want anybody to know I didn't know what they were talking about. And I said, gee, I hope they weren't weapons related, or something like that, So anyway, that's the second part of the framework. Have good, clear communications, avoid acronyms and jargon. Please don't publicize a list of here are our acronyms and jargon, because that just institutionalizes it, right? So, and then if you want to make friends with people, if you want to have more friends than you've ever had in your life, get into a meeting where somebody's doing that and raise your hand and say, would you mind sharing with us what that means? What does that acronym mean? Because then everybody else in the room is doing the same thing. They just don't want to raise their hands.